Hi, I'm Celia Boothman, founder of LTR Coaching, and I'd like to welcome you to the Inspired Triathletes podcast, where I'll be bringing you stories from female triathletes and taking on topics that are important to women in the sport. Hello and welcome to today's episode. Today I'm here with Carrie Jackson, who is a performance and mental training expert. She is a certified mental performance consultant and the author of On Top of Your Game and co-author of Rebound, which is to help injured athletes. And she coaches athletes of all levels to master their mindsets. So today we're going to just talk a little bit about some of the stuff that you cover in the books, a little bit about the books and some tips for people that are wanting to develop their mindset, and stuff that we can apply across sport and across our daily life as well, because I think sport is an amazing learning ground for all of us, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And it's amazing that all of the things that I work on with my athletes for their performance are really their life skills. So you can apply them in life, we're sort of performing as well. It's a different kind of performance than sport, but it absolutely the things I get to work on across the board help in both.
Yeah, definitely. So what was it that prompted you to start going down that route of mental performance and mindset
Yeah.
training?
I actually was not an athlete growing up. I didn't come into my sports until it was later in college where I kind of found my groove with sports. And at that time, like early on, I was racing cars and in my early 20s, and then also for a very long time was big into snowboarding and rock climbing. My undergrad, I thought I wanted to be a therapist, and as I this is literally as I was walking across the stage to get my diploma, I realized, "Oh, I don't think this is what I'm supposed to do." And
Mm.
what made me realize that was at the time, it was before the positive psychology movement, and so the way that people were working in mental health was very much based in an illness model versus a wellness model, and it
Mm.
didn't make sense to me at that time. I didn't realize that, I didn't have the language for that, but I just was like, "This isn't I don't think this is what I'm supposed to do." So I moved to Tahoe. I was on my way to grad school and then decided, "Okay, well, if I'm not gonna do that, I might as well do something else," and so I moved to Tahoe and was doing my own sports, and during that time realizing some of the psychology behind my own performance and some of my the climbing partners performances, and it was like, oh, this is really interesting, but had no idea sports psychology existed as a field of study.
Mm.
And then one day my mom went to an open house because she went on to get her master's in counseling and is a therapist, and and she found a brochure, was like, for a sports psychology program. She said, "Oh, I know you've been thinking about school again, and I saw this and thought of you." And she gave me the program, and I was like, "What is this? Oh my gosh!" And I had no idea it
It's like
existed.
the
I went.
perfect thing.
It
Yeah.
was amazing. Next open house I went to and signed up, and then hit the ground running. Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. That's interesting you come from that background as well, because I was originally into climbing as well, and I loved
Oh,
snowboarding
oh,
too. And
I
Lake
miss it.
Tahoe, I went there with my dad. It was so cool. Like really, I had a
Oh,
great time there.
it's such a special place. I miss, yeah,
Yeah.
all of it.
Yeah, it was cool. We spent a week there or something, and
Oh,
yeah, just snowboarding. And there was that bit across the border where you've got the border, haven't you? And you kind of
yes.
like one side
Yeah.
there's casinos and the
You
other
can
side there's not.
it's a kind of a weird, interesting place to live
Yeah.
because there's very much like a delineation, of
Yeah.
oh, okay, we are entering a new world.
Yeah, definitely. That's funny. So with athletes, what are the most common mental obstacles that you find they face, and how do you help them with that kind of thing?
Yeah, there's a few. I think probably one of the most common has to do with our own, your own, self-limiting beliefs,
Mm.
and how that can sort of eat away at your feelings of confidence and courage and resilience in being able to have an optimal performance. And I think part of that is just times and at all levels, like from my
Yeah.
recreational athletes to my elite professional athletes, just putting so much pressure on themselves for a specific outcome that um, that they end up not performing to their potential because of that pressure. Those are a couple big ones. Some others, like I get, because I specialize in working with injured athletes. I work with a lot of
Mm,
people coming back into their sport and sort of building up their confidence and mental skills to both navigate that injury journey and also come back into their athletic life and their sports. And then some people like experiencing burnout. So
mm,
it really is very dependent on the athlete, but a big one is just that recognition that I'm I'm not performing consistently, or I know I could be performing better, and I know that I'm the one getting in my own way, are the kind of
mm.
the main themes there.
Yeah, definitely. That kind of little inner chatter that we all
Yes.
have, and people think,
Yes.
"Oh, the elites don't have that, they're different to us," but they're not, are they?
No,
They
nope, not at
they're
all.
still human. We've all
Exactly.
got
I
those moments.
remember was working with a cycling team, a women's cycling team, professional team, early on in my career, and I did this activity where people were telling me the self talk that they had, some of the chatter,
Right.
and one of them, like Olympic athlete, high level professional athlete, was like, pulled me aside later and was like, "That was like the most eye opening thing. I had no idea anyone else was feeling that same way and had those same
Yeah.
thoughts." And it's like, oh yeah, everybody, everybody
Yeah.
does. It's just part of. It's just how the brain works.
Yeah, and I think once you realize that, it's kind of helpful because you don't think, "It's just me," and I you can
Exactly.
go in a bit of a
Yeah.
spiral then, can't
Yeah.
you? It's
Like,
like,
what is wrong with me? Like, nothing. There's nothing
mm,
wrong with you. It's very normal. And other athletes definitely go through it.
yeah, and it's not something that just disappear, it's one of those things that you definitely have to work on as well, in
Yes.
practice.
Yeah, it is a practice. Unfortunately, it's not one of those things where you can like, okay, check that off the list. I will never
Yeah.
have a negative thought again. Done. Like, if only. Yeah.
Be good. Well, that's kind of it. I suppose it's part of the whole thing is working that out and understanding it, and you gain more, I guess. If you could just tick it off,
Yeah. Yeah.
it
It
would
would be nice.
it would be nice, but you'd miss out on stuff as well.
You
You're like,
absolutely would, right? And we have
yeah,
that voice for a reason. Like, we wouldn't really want it to go away entirely, even though it might
no,
feel nice for a while. Like,
yeah,
it has a very important role. And so understanding that and understanding a little bit about sort of how the brain works and that we have this negativity
mm,
bias built in, um, can sometimes help provide some context for the thoughts that we're having. And then we can question, like, oh, but is that thought true? Or is this just
yeah,
I call it, are you feeding the monster, or feeding the athlete? Like, I talk about that. I think in both the books actually.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so which one are you feeding right now? And sometimes we have to stop listening to the monster and start feeding the athlete, right? So um the I kind of think of it like your brain is not the boss of you. You are the boss of your brain, but you have to come in and be the boss and tell it like, "Oh, no, no, no. I know what you're doing there. You're trying to protect me, but I've got this." Like, and come in with that other voice.
yeah, for sure. That really helps to have that. It's like separating it as well from yourself, isn't it?
Yeah.
Kind of going, this
Yes.
is the voice, this is not. My son did that the other day, and I was like really impressed with him. He's 15, and he was
Amazing.
like, yeah, he said, oh, I just listened. I thought there was this gremlin. And I just said, oh, be quiet. He was like,
Yes.
oh,
Oh,
amazing.
he, like, organically did one of the techniques to create, we call it, like, creating psychological distance, like, that
Right.
if you personify it in that way, or there's different techniques to realize, like, "Oh, I don't have to believe that voice." Like, you don't have to believe
Yeah.
every thought that comes into your head, but it's really hard
No.
not to. You have to train that.
Yeah, definitely. I was like, something's gone in somewhere because we'd have talked about that. But I
That's
was trying, there
great.
was me blabbing on, telling him all this stuff, and he was going, you just sound like you're going, meh, meh, meh. Meh." I was like,
Right? But then he
okay.
says something like that, and you're like,
Yeah,
"Oh my god, he's listening."
yeah, yeah. It
Uh,
was quite a funny moment. I said, I won't bother next time. I can see you've got the skills to handle it, so
yeah.
it's okay.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So with athletes, how can they kind of, you mentioned people get a little bit fixated on on their performance and results. How can they learn to enjoy the process more and get into that moment rather than fixating on the outcome.
Yeah. What there's a few different things that I work on with athletes with that. And one is getting very grounded in why you are participating in the sport and not why anyone else is, right? Because especially like with my endurance athletes, because I specialize in working with endurance athletes. I work with all athletes, all sports, but I very much love my endurance athletes.
Mm,
And so my triathletes and cyclists and runners. And one of the things that's interesting about triathlon in particular, well, all of those sports actually, is that you can very much get sort of pulled into this feeling of like, I did a sprint, so now I have to do an Olympic. Well, I did an Olympic, so now I got to do a
mm,
half. Well, I'm not a real triathlete if I don't do an Ironman. You like
yeah.
just keep upping, right? Like setting the bar higher and higher, but not ever really checking in with like, but do I want to do that distance? Like just
Yeah.
because they're very any triathlete that's done those know like they're very different sports in a way. Like racing a sprint versus racing an Ironman. Those are different different beasts that you're taking different like goals that you're taking on. And so
Yeah.
sometimes really getting grounded with like, well, what does this mean to me, and why do I want to participate in this? Because it takes time, right? It takes time, it takes money, it takes resources.
Mm,
So why am I choosing to do that here and spend that time and those resources here, because I could spend them anywhere, and get very grounded in what it means to you. And then from that place setting your goals around how do what do you want from your sport. And I think the trap that a lot of triathletes fall into is just setting the outcome goals versus
yeah.
also having the process goals, right? So the outcome goal is like the what is it that you want to achieve, right? Is it like, do you want to get a PR in this race? Are you looking for a specific time or a specific placing, or just like to finish your first iron just like to
Yeah.
complete an Ironman? I remove that just out of my mouth.
Yeah.
So, but so those are all outcomes, right? And it's fine to have an outcome goal, but when you only have an outcome goal without like the milestones, like the process, the short-term goals and the process goals, what happens is you'll be in the middle of your event and something happens where in your mind you start to see your outcome goal slipping away,
Mm,
and now you're no longer um, your focus is internal instead of external, meaning like now I'm wrapped up in my thoughts and my fears and my what ifs and my already like feeding my disappointment, instead of having my focus external and going, oh, what do I need to adjust, right? Because many triathletes will tell you like there's things that didn't go as planned and they still had an amazing race, and it's
yeah.
because they were able to stay in the moment and make those decisions in order to adjust as things went. And having process goals helps you do that, because your process goals are like, what are the things that I need to focus on during the triathlon in order to accomplish the outcome goal.
Mm,
So you're in the moment versus time traveling and getting hooked by that, like, am I going to make that goal, not make that goal? And that's where a lot of that pressure comes from. And
mm,
so it also, both of those things call on you, like getting grounded in why is this important to me, and making sure you're effective with the types of goals that you set. What they're really doing is helping you to redefine success, because
yeah.
sometimes we're just taking in like the messages from the cultural environment of where we live, of the sport that we're in, and we're just taking those messages and using those to determine what feels successful and not successful, instead of us making
Mm,
that instead of you deciding like this is what it means to me, therefore this is how I'm going to gauge my feelings of success. But it's very hard to do that when you're like immersed in a culture that's telling you like,
yeah.
no, this is how we define
Yeah.
success.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of that kind of societal pressure on how we should live and what that should look like, what success should look like. And like you say, at the end of the day, it's our choice and we can decide what that means for us. And I think like it's particularly hard for athletes when so I sometimes talk to athletes who DNF on an Ironman, and it's like you've invested so much time and effort into that
Yeah.
one event, and it's a big financial commitment, but there's always something that they can take from that experience. And I think talking to people along the way and having them have that, okay, well, you might not finish the Ironman, but look at what you've learned, what what
Yeah.
has been part of the journey? Where are you now compared to where you were back then? And
When
and
you
sometimes,
started.
yeah,
Yeah.
people can't always see that. They kind of
No.
like they
Yeah.
get like,
We're
I didn't finish, and it's all about that
exactly.
rather than actually look what you did do though.
Yes. It's
And
hard not to focus on, like, what you didn't do versus what you did do. And that's
yeah.
one of the really unique things about Ironman in particular is that because of the way that the sport works, athletes inevitably put more pressure on themselves for that great outcome because of the time and the money that
Mm,
it takes to
mm,
get there. So it's not like soccer or basketball, or where you have a performance that didn't go the way you wanted it to, and you're like, okay, well, let's learn from that, and we get to try again next weekend. And it doesn't
yeah.
work the same, right? Like, so it's
It's like a year of
hard.
your life, kind of. Oh
Exactly.
my God. Yeah.
So it really calls on you. Like, you
Yeah.
can't just look at the outcome in terms
Mm,
of your how you feel about yourself and connect your self-worth to that, because it's so much bigger than that. So when I work with
mm,
my athletes that are Ironman athletes, I tell them, like, part of defining success is the fact that you got to the start line, because that
yeah.
is a big deal in and of itself. Like, all the decisions that you had to make to get ready, all of the times that you had to rest when you really wanted to push so that you didn't get, overtrained or injured, or, everything that you did to get to the start line in a position to be able to race, that is
Mm,
huge. Like, so helping them see that, because they don't, it doesn't feel that way, because it's like, of course you want to do well on the day. So
yeah.
it's very much, how do you, like, I tell them, whatever race day brings, that's what you're meant to experience that day. And that is
Mm,
part of your journey for whatever reason, good or bad. Like, that is just meant to be your part of your experience.
mm,
And so kind of helping them open up their definition of what it means to be an athlete, and what it means to get to the start line in addition to what it means to get to the finish.
yeah, I love that idea of like you've got, whatever you experience is what you need to experience
Yeah.
because you've got learning from it. You're going to have some learning. And one of the
Yeah.
things I think that you talk about I think it's in Rebound, you probably wrote about it in On Top of Your Game as well, was that focusing on what you have got or what you can do, and
Yes.
instead
Yeah.
of all of the things that you
Always
can't
out of
do
my
or that
control.
you
Yeah.
didn't do. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
So in Rebound, what was it that kind of inspired you to write that book
Mm,
or co-author that book on there?
yeah.
It's actually
That
a
one.
specialism, isn't it?
It is,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's funny, it took a while for the book to come, but
Mm,
versus the thought that, "Oh, this is a place that needs to be addressed in the field." So what I was so it first started with a very personal experience of
okay.
injury. So I had, before I came into my sports psychology program, I had injured my left knee, and had arthroscopic surgery. Like, I had a torn meniscus, and I had a really hard time recovering from that injury. I really struggled with pain management during rehab. I really struggled with feeling confident and trusting my knee, getting back into climbing and snowboarding. And I just struggled tremendously. And there was zero support for the mental aspects of recovery. And I didn't even know at the time that there should be. Like, that was before my program. And so then I go and I study sports psychology, and I'm like, at the end of my first year in the program, and I'm out snowboarding. It's the last day of the season, last run of the day, and my snowboarding partner at the time was like, "Hey, should we do one more?" And I was like, and I thought about, I hesitated for, like, I don't know, 2 seconds, and I was like, "Yeah, let's do one more." It's like, no, famous last
Oh,
words. Like, so, and it was a total fluke accident. Like, I ended up tearing my MCL on the same
no.
knee. So different injury, same knee. But as soon as they put me in the sled and start taking me down the mountain, I thought to myself, okay, Carrie, your recovery is now your sport, and absolutely everything you were doing to put, that you're putting into your sports now goes into your recovery, and everything you're learning about optimal performance, you're going to apply that to your injury recovery. And I did. And boy, my experience from the first injury to the second was so profoundly different that I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh my god. Every athlete needs to know this and have access to this." Um, because I came back and had my best season ever, and it was
Yeah.
100% because of the mental training that I was doing that got me through that period of time with resilience, and then continued to serve me because I'd strengthened those skills once I was back
Yeah.
on the in my sports. And so um, then I had the opportunity early in my career to work with a lot of cyclists and kind of specialized in working with cyclists, and then came into and then triathlon. And if you work with cyclists and triathletes, there's inevitably you're going to be working with someone coming back from a crash and
Yeah.
someone coming back from an injury. And so I did a lot of that same work I did with myself on with them, and was like, okay, this is like, I recognized at that point, wow, at a time when athletes need the most support, they're getting the absolute least, and
Yeah.
this is a problem. And then fast forward, like, so I was working with athletes, and then I just came to the point where it was like, there's textbooks for, like, professionals on psychology of injury, and there's research, but there's nothing for the athlete. This is a problem. Like, why
Yeah.
is there nothing? So then it was like, okay, it's time to write this book. And then my co-author, Cindy Kuzma, she reached out to me. So she had interviewed me for as an expert for like a subject matter expert for some articles that she had written. So she's a freelance journalist, and and so I put something cryptic on Facebook saying that I was taking a sabbatical and I was going to start working on a new project, and she
Yeah.
guessed that it was going to be a book about injury, which is amazing that she did. So we'd never met
Yeah.
each other in person, but she knew I was going on the sabbatical, and she's like, "Hey, we should chat," and I was like, "Okay," and so we have a conversation, and she said, "Would you ever think about having a co-author?" And really, that had never dawned on me, like, first, and I was like, "No," and then I was like, "Huh, no," but I like, it just didn't, it's because I just never thought of it. And so we're both on the, like, other side of this call thinking, would I'm thinking to myself, "Would it be weird if I invited her to come to my sabbatical?" Because I was going to, like, North Carolina and hang out for, and she's thinking on the other end, "Would it be weird if I invited myself to her sabbatical?" So we decided, "All right, let's do it. Let's, for a week of it, we'll get together, we'll work on the outline, see if we work well together. And if we do, awesome, let's do this project. And if not, the worst case is I have an outline for my book." And we were
Yeah.
both okay with that. And so, and then,
It worked.
and then we have our happy ending of we worked
Yeah.
together and have the book and do the podcast. And yeah, so it was
Yeah.
a wonderful collaboration.
Yeah, I thought it was a great book. Really, so many tips in there, so much useful information. I wasn't actually injured when I read it,
Ah, I've
but
had other
I
people
read it.
tell me that. Yeah.
No, I was,
Oh,
but just because because I'm a coach, I wanted to help athletes who were in that
yeah,
situation, and it was like, oh, this is really interesting, and I thought it would help me. So I wish I'd known this when I did get injured because it would have helped me quite a
right.
lot.
Exactly.
Um,
Oh,
so yeah, anyone that's injured, I definitely recommend you. And even if you're not, there's so many useful tips in there
there's
that,
some great tools in there, yeah, that
yeah, they
work either
cross
way.
over.
Yeah.
And there's, yeah, there's like little things that I remember from it and have sort of stuck in my subconscious somewhere that help. So what advice do you give to athletes who are struggling with their confidence and when they've had an injury? Is there
With
any?
injury, a big one is, well, one of the things that happens for injured athletes is they start to feel like they're no longer an athlete, right? So they're not like, who am I if I'm not Carrie the rock climber or Carrie the snowboarder? And it's very disorienting, and you feel like you're no longer connected to your athletic identity. So that's a big one. Is just that reminder for them is you are still an athlete, and your recovery is now your sport. And athletes like that, like, it's very sticky, and they resonate with that, and it helps because it does, even in the language that we use, like, it does feel like you're sidelined. Like, okay,
Mm,
great. Well, you go ahead and get better, and we'll see you when you're back in action. And you're
yeah.
just kind of like cast aside. And um and so it can feel very disorienting when you, like, a lot of the decisions that it's part of who you are, it's part of what
Mm,
you do. It feeds so many different needs that you have. Like, for a lot of athletes, it's like their stress outlet, their social outlet,
mm,
it's their their competitive outlet, like all of these things. So there's all these little losses that come with being injured that people don't always recognize. So helping them realize, yes, this sucks. And yes, you would absolutely prefer not to be injured, yet you are. And this just happens to be where you are on your athletic journey. So, how do we get you through this part of your journey? So, sort of stepping
Mm.
back and looking at your bigger picture versus, looking at it like when we're just looking under the microscope, it can feel like big and scary. It's like, the analogy I use sometimes is if you've ever seen a fly under a microscope, they're terrifying. Like you should look it up. If anyone's never done it, like look up
Yeah,
what does a fly look like up close? They're terrifying, right? But when just see it on the wall, it's like whatever, it's a fly. It's a tiny little
yeah.
fly. So that's that shift in perspective can be really helpful. So that's
Mm,
one is like because that's so some common fears that come up with my injured athletes is like, am I going to be the same athlete I was before?
yeah.
They're worried about losing fitness while everyone else is gaining fitness. Um, they're worried about like, can I trust my body? Can I trust this part of my body to be able to push the way that I did before? And discerning like another one that's really challenging is this pain that I'm feeling pain that's a sign to stop, or is this a normal part of the
Mm,
recovery process? So there's so much you're navigating when you're injured, that it can be really helpful. Or just recognizing like there's absolutely a mental recovery that needs to come with the physical recovery, and
mm,
oftentimes because people get a lot of support for the physical and not so much for the mental. We're often recovered and cleared physically before we're mentally ready and before
yeah.
we've built our confidence up to feel excited and strong mentally to go get back into your sport and back into your training.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've been reading a lot about grief recently, and there's a part of it there's a bit of grief there for what
Yeah,
they've lost, and I guess they have to navigate that as well, that kind of
absolutely.
who am I and
Yes, yeah, because
and
it
it's
feels
a
like
little bit, yeah,
yeah,
it's like bit of you's not you anymore. Or
exactly,
mm.
absolutely, yeah.
So any mistakes that people make when they're recovering, what are the common mistakes that you see, and
I
how can
think
people avoid those?
yeah, sometimes one of the mistakes that's really interesting is that sometimes the templates that we use to become a great athlete when we're a healthy athlete don't work the same way. We can't use that same template when we're injured.
Mm,
And so, one of the things I sometimes see athletes struggle with is um, that they don't know the difference between like they can push through the pain, and
yeah.
sometimes they'll do too much too soon, right? And sometimes that's because there's a few different reasons, right? Sometimes you just are you have an assumption that like, "Oh, okay, well if I do this much PT, and it's going to get me back in 12 weeks, maybe if I do twice as much I'll get back in 6 weeks." Like doesn't work
Yeah.
that way. Most people know that now, but like sometimes people would just like they thought it would speed up their recovery.
Yeah.
For some, it's you when you start to see the light at the end of the tunnel and you start to like increase the intensity or what you're able to do and you feel good and you're excited and then you push a little too hard,
Mm,
and you don't feel it till the next day and then realize oh and feeling like that was a failure, I think is
yeah.
a mistake that people make. And it's like sometimes you can't know what your body's ready for until you push
Mm,
it. And now
yeah.
like you feeling good in that moment doesn't mean go harder. It means do it as
Mm,
prescribed and see how you feel the next day. So, um, and then sometimes I see athletes push themselves. It's almost like like in desperation of needing the answer of whether or not I'm going to be the same athlete, and they
yeah.
just push a little too hard too soon with that. And then sometimes it's because they're applying the same template from like and so what I tell my injured athletes is you're an athlete. We know you can push through the pain. Especially if you're
Mm,
an endurance athlete, right?
yeah.
Like we know you can push through the pain. You are good at that. So,
Mm,
right now, when you're injured, a sign of your mental toughness isn't whether or not you can push through, it's whether or not you can hold back. Because that's going to be harder for you, is to not
yeah.
do it. And that is where you need to flex your mental toughness. And they're like, yeah, that makes sense. So I think
Mm,
that's a big one, is just either under adhering or over adhering to their recovery protocol and their physical therapy. Either under adhering because they are afraid, and don't have the tools to know the difference between, what am I really ready for, and I'm in that fear of re-injury, or doing too much too soon.
and it's hard to know that unless you've been in that situation before
Yep.
and you don't know, and every injury is gonna be different as well, isn't it? So,
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I think
mm,
that's confusing for athletes sometimes too. Is like if they've been injured before and they were like, I was fine mentally last time, and now they're not. It's very confusing. And so kind of
yeah,
explaining what's happening in the brain and why that can happen, and that you just need some tools to kind of rewire some stuff so that we can, so your body knows that it's safe.
yeah.
Because that's what it feels like. Your brain's trying to protect your body and it's gone into like overdrive.
Yeah, yeah, there's like every little thing is like, "Could this be that? Could that be
Yeah,
this?" And
exactly. You're so hyper focused on that part of your body after you've injured it
yeah.
forever, for a year, right? Like, still,
Mm,
it's been years since my knee injury, and I'll feel something and be like, huh, what's that? What's going on? And now it doesn't scare me. Before it would, but you don't have that kind of hyper awareness of your, you know, earlobe unless you've injured your earlobe or your elbow or whatever.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, definitely. I like that reframing as well of the your mental toughness needs to, because as like you say, endurance athletes, we're used to pushing through the pain, we're used to ignoring a lot of
Yeah.
those signs in our body, and then when it
Yep.
comes to actually have to listen to your body and
Yeah.
tune into that, it's very hard to switch between the two and be able to have both. We definitely need to learn that.
Yes.
And labeling it as mental toughness, I think, would help a lot of people, because then they
Yeah.
don't see it as like, oh, I'm being lazy. We assign all these values, don't we, to how we're
Exactly.
behaving.
You don't see it as a weakness anymore. You flip
Yeah,
that entirely and go, "No, no." Yeah, and athletes like that.
yeah, yeah. This is hard to do. It's much harder than what you
Yeah,
do normally.
exactly.
Yeah. So how do you help athletes? If they're in an Ironman event, have you got any tips and tricks for people to get through that injury? We talked about managing the sensations of pain or pushing through when you really want to stop. Is there anything
Yes.
that you use and that helps athletes in
Yeah.
particular? No?
Yeah, there's a few different strategies. So when you're, especially when you're like you're really pushing, max effort, right? Or you're having a moment in your race where you're really feeling it, and I think a lot of endurance athletes know, like sometimes that happens in like if, and then it's your body kind of settles in again. Sometimes, so I will say the first thing I actually usually say is that it's not always mental. Like sometimes those signals are your body's telling you need to eat, like you need to
Yeah.
fuel or you need to hydrate. So assuming that your level of fitness is there for the effort you're putting out, and that you're hydrated and fueled, like so that you're not feeling those emotions because your body's like, eat, you need, what are you doing, we
Yeah.
can't sustain this, like you need to
Yeah.
eat. um there's definitely some strategies to use when you're at that sort of, you're feeling it and you're pushing and
Mm,
your kind of brain is screaming at your body to stop. We could just stop right now. We could just walk at this
mm,
moment, right? So, a couple strategies that work really well. One is called rhythmic cognitive behavior. So, basically, what that is like you're repeating something, and either a word, like a mantra to yourself with each foot strike or each pedal stroke, or counting your steps or counting your pedal strokes, right, to a certain number. So you wouldn't just like count forever. It would be
mm,
like you count to eight. That mine is eight. I like counting to eight and then repeating that. So people kind of
okay.
find their different, like what the number is that feels good that you count to, and you just as you go, you just are repeating that over and over. So basically, what it's doing is it's forcing your brain to process that information and not giving it room to process other information. So you just like kind of get into this motion of like,
Yeah.
that's all I need to do right now is count. Like that's what I'm doing. So that can be really effective for those moments. Another one is what I call establishing an end.
Okay.
Sometimes what happens is you're really feeling it and you think, "Oh my god, how am I going to, you know, run another, 7 miles, or how am I going to ride another 25 miles or whatever it is." You and the brain doesn't know that, like, oh, you might settle in. It's not going to feel like this the entire way. But your brain's job is to kind of allocate its energy resources. So
Mhm.
it's doing all these, mental gymnastics of like, we can't sustain this. You better slow down. Even if you're physically capable, but the brain's trying to like doesn't is trying to protect you. So establishing an end means you're maybe as an example of that would be, let's say you're running and you pick a marker, like you pick, like, I'm going to run to the
Mhm.
next tree and I'm going to take a breath and then I'm going to choose where I run to next. So your brain doesn't think, oh my god, how am I going to run
Yeah.
7 miles? It goes,
Yeah.
okay, I can get to that tree. And then like,
Yeah.
okay, what can you get to next? Okay, I can. And sometimes the body will then just settle in, right? And because
Mm.
you've calmed the brain down a little bit. It's like if you've ever had the experience of running or riding and you're on a climb and you can see the top of the climb and then you get there and then you realize it keeps going and you're like
Yeah.
soul crushed in that moment, like, and all of a sudden you feel it in your body even though
Yeah.
just before you, and it's because of that, but like the brain was like, no, we allocated our energy resources for
Yeah.
that. We didn't know it kept going, so we're just going to slow you, we're going to stop right now. So it's
Yeah.
this like interesting um thing that's happening in the brain with based on expectation of what you
Yeah.
thought was happening, what's happening now, that kind of messes with your, yeah. So having some of those strategies can be helpful.
What can you do then to turn if that happens and you're like, "Oh my god, there's even more." You have to quickly do
Yeah.
some mental
Yes,
gymnastics.
you do. Yeah. And sometimes the most effective in that situation is to kind of like call on sort of being absurd or finding your humor, and
Okay.
immediately right in that moment to say to yourself, "Oh my, thank God, I was really hoping there was more." And like, so you just like
Yeah.
go, "Okay." So what it does, and then it provides a little bit of levity and just regrouping, basically,
Yeah.
of like, "Okay." Um, Another one I'll do is the 3 Rs, which is regroup, reset, recommit. Or it's just like,
Okay.
"Okay, I didn't know that was there, but it is there and I can do this and here we go." Like
Yeah.
just like so having, but the most important thing is knowing what your strategy is going to be ahead of time. Like, okay, if
Mm.
that happens, this is what I'm going to do. So you don't spend like shortens your reaction time. So you
Yeah.
don't have to spend time in that moment thinking, what, oh my god,
Oh
what do I do
god.
now?
Yeah.
And going to your default setting, which is going to be like, no.
Yeah.
That's not what was supposed to be there. Instead, like, oh, I planned for this. I know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I had like the first time I did Ironman, there was like a lot of um, reading that I did around before, and so I had those theories in mind of like
Yes.
breaking things down into sections and all that kind of thing. And I remember getting off the bike and onto the run, and my brain was just like, "What are you doing? You're so stupid. Why did you think you could
Why
do
would you
this?"
do this?
Yeah, that was
Oh, it's
my
great.
initial thought, and then I was like, okay, just 1 mile, 1 mile.
Here we go.
And then once
Yeah.
I got started, I was fine, but, I mean, it was tough, obviously, but
Yeah.
it was that initial, like, "What are you doing? Why would you
It's like,
do that?"
people don't do this. Why would you do this?
It is crazy though, isn't it? It
Uh,
is a crazy sport.
yes.
So how about the role that self-compassion provides
Yeah.
with being a resilient athlete? How would you describe that?
Yeah. I think it's really one of the most important skills we can have, and probably one that we train and talk about the least.
Mm,
And and that ability to have self-compassion means that what the skill that you've worked on is that sort of psychological distancing, which is, am I able to kind of step outside of myself and be a student of myself?
mm,
Like, can I step out of myself and see this person in a way that I would see any other person? And how would I feel about this person going through this challenging thing? And the way you would treat that person when we make that separation is often very different than the way that we treat ourselves. So that ability to have compassion and grace with yourself, and finding that place where, like, oh, I really like myself and love myself and respect myself. Why would I treat myself that way? Right? Why would I say those things to myself? But it takes work. It takes
mm,
effort, to do that. And when you can do it, oh my gosh, like, it's the most incredible feeling to be able to have self compassion in a very genuine, authentic way. To be able to go, hi, man, I know how meaningful this was to you and how disappointed you are to not get it. And I'm so sorry you're going through this, but you've done a
mm,
tremendous job getting yourself to this place. Like, to be able to do that in a
mm.
way where you really feel it is very powerful.
Yeah, definitely. To really mean it because,
Yeah.
yeah.
Exactly. Right? So I'll do that. So sometimes I'll do workshops where, like, I'll have people write down on a sticky note, like, something that they do to feed the monster, right? Like, so a negative
Yeah.
thought that they think about themselves sometimes, and they'll have them do a positive one too. Or like when they're feeding the athlete, something more instructive or positive. And so with the negative one, I'll say, okay, so now you're going to turn to the person next to you and you're going to say it to that person. And there's like always this audible, like, what? I would never. And I'm like, Exactly. You would
Exactly.
never. So why are you
Yeah.
doing that to yourself? Why are you treating yourself that way? So we're so very hard on ourselves, much more so than we are on others.
Yeah, definitely. It's that little voice again, isn't it? The one that we
Yeah.
need to tell, "Stop
Yeah.
that."
You right? Just
We
give
don't
the
need that.
monster a hug. I think that's
Yeah.
it. The monster just needs a hug. Like,
Yeah.
you're okay. I know you're scared, but we're okay.
Yeah. I know. Oh, that's great. So you also have a podcast,
Yeah.
the Injured Athletes Club podcast. So where
Yes.
can people find that? And what was it that inspired you to start that podcast, really?
Yeah, it was, so it's, you could we're all over, right? Spotify, all the places you can
Okay.
find your podcast, you can find the Injured Athletes Club, and it was definitely, we started it before we wrote the book because um, we wanted to build an audience basically for the book,
Okay.
and so we are
Yeah.
like, "Oh, maybe we should do a podcast." And we loved that idea of, like, kind of creating this ecosystem of being able to support athletes. So we were like, oh, we'll have the podcast and the book, and then we also have this amazing, incredible Facebook support group called the Injured Athletes Club that's full of athletes that are either currently injured or have been injured and get it. And like, it's an wonderfully supportive group. It's amazing. So we were
Mm.
like, oh, we wanted to kind of create this ecosystem. But when I started the podcast, I'd never listened to a podcast before. So I was like, I guess I should start listening to podcasts. And I'm like, this is great. They're great. It's a
Yeah.
great way to like, so so yeah, so that was kind of the catalyst. And now it's just every year where we're like, do we want to do another year? And we're like, absolutely. Like, we just
Yeah.
it's just fun to be able to talk to people about their stories and share that with other people.
Yeah. And so people can find it on Spotify
Yeah.
and subscribe and like and subscribe.
Yes,
Give you a
exactly.
5-star review.
Yes.
Uh, but I just want to ask you a couple more questions. So, are
Yeah.
you seeing any trends in sports psychology or anything that you see evolving in the area at all?
You know, I it's still sort of in its very early stages, but I think it's going to be very interesting to see how people in the field start using AI to
Mm,
help, sort of like the different ways that we might be able to use it to facilitate athletes' performances or be more effective in the work that we do. I think a lot of people are afraid, like, it's going to take over and
yeah.
there's not going to be room for us. I'm like, I don't know if that's the way to think of it. Like, I think that maybe, are there ways that we could, like, are there things that we could do with it that are really going to help serve the athletes that we work with? in combination, right? Like that it's
Yeah.
that there's still value in like having the person that can do, kind of do the assessments and has that depth of experience. Um, but are there ways that we can, so I think that might be an interesting trend that we're seeing. I
Mm,
definitely see more like in the year, because I've been doing this for 20 plus years.
mm,
There's definitely been a shift in um like early in my career. I had to, oftentimes I was and it, needing to, the way that I would have to market myself is like actually explaining what I do. So it
right.
wasn't like everybody knows what a firefighter does. You don't have to explain like
Mm,
why that's an important thing to like,
mm,
and it was very much part of the process, was like educating. And so,
mm,
and there's, that's still true, but not to the same extent. Like it's
mm,
definitely, we hear about it a lot more. Like almost every major league baseball team has someone that, they have whole departments now, and a lot of universities are now having that support also. So it's definitely the shift towards mental health and the understanding of specifically what people in the field of sports psychology do, and what we do in mental training, and what makes someone qualified to do
mm,
that versus someone that's just hanging up a shingle and saying, "Hey, I can work on your mindset." That there's very much a
mm,
difference of like, in terms of the field of study, and like making sure that you're not doing harm because you don't
yeah.
know all the theory and research, and have the experience to be able to say that. So that's definitely like a shift that I've seen also.
Yeah, I mean, it's so powerful, isn't it? It's like it's something that we didn't really think about for a long time, and then I think
Yeah.
people have realised how important it is and how much more we can get from ourselves if we do tap into that. So it's really great to see that coming, and I think the AI. I did a podcast about AI actually about AI and coaching
Ah, interesting.
not
Yeah.
long ago because we I wanted to talk about it because it is interesting, and I think
Yeah.
there's stuff that it's like everything, isn't it? When smartphones come out, it's like there's some
Right.
great things about it and there's some not so great things about
Yes.
it, and we need
Yes.
to pick the tools that serve us and use those and not get sucked in and you
Yeah.
know have it cause us harm, and we need to be able to make that distinction, I guess, with it.
Yes, absolutely. I remember, I used to be a professor in graduate school for sports psychology, and I got early on when online learning was just coming onto the scene. I was asked, I applied for a position at a university that was all online, and I went through the training, and I was like, I can't do this. Like the way that I work with my students, um, this doesn't make sense. I can't be effective online. And
Mm,
then, and I said, thank you so much for the opportunity. I've decided this isn't a good fit for me. And then it was probably a year later, or not even a year maybe, where I realized, okay, this isn't going away. This
mm,
is not like, so maybe the thing to figure out instead is how can you be effective in this space, and
mm.
versus saying like, nope, it's never going to work, it'll never be effective, it's going to
Yeah.
ruin our lives. Like
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
so I think sometimes that's what people are kind of doing with AI. It's like, this is the worst thing that
Yeah.
could happen, instead of like, okay, well, it's not going away,
Mm,
so maybe I start to figure out how to use it as a tool,
yeah.
and in what ways is it beneficial, and in what ways is it detrimental, and understanding
Mm,
what where that line is.
yeah, and I think we're still sort of figuring it out, I think,
Oh,
with
absolutely.
so many
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. Very true.
Yeah. So if you could give one piece of advice to athletes everywhere, what could it be? That's a really hard
Oh,
question, isn't it? 'Cause it's one
yes.
piece of advice.
I
Go on.
know, and usually I would struggle with that, and I had the immediate thing that came
Okay.
into my head was stop being so hard on yourself.
Yeah.
Just yeah, like, stop being so hard on yourself. You're doing amazing. You're doing great things. You are a beautiful, worthy person. Stop being, no matter what your result is, so stop
Yeah.
being so hard on yourself.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that. Thank you. Oh, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really great
Yeah.
chatting with you. I've really enjoyed it. And people can find your book, Rebound, and the other book that you wrote was On Top of Your Game, which I
Yes.
also recommend. That's more about performance,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, yeah, that one's definitely more for that book I wrote when I had a string of athletes that were experiencing such debilitating performance anxiety that they were starting to consider quitting their sports. And
Oh,
then
okay.
we worked together, and some of them came back to have the best season ever. And they just didn't have the tools to know how to deal with the pressure that they were putting on themselves and the performance
Yeah.
anxiety. Um so that one's like uh athletes who are in competition, healthy and rebounds for the you're coming back from an injury.
Yeah. And they're both great books. You can find them if you Google, and I'll put some links as well for that. And I'll put a link to your podcast in the show notes as well. So yeah,
Wonderful.
thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening today. Have a great day. Take care. Bye for now.